Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Matt Jarbo. Welcome to Podio Commentary. It's been a minute, I will fully admit. I apologize for the delay in episodes. What happened was I fell and hurt my back on a work-related injury. I've been kind of bedridden for half the last month, and I've just been trying to get myself back into the swing of things. So today, I wanted to talk with you guys about a new movie. In fact, I want to start with this very weird factoid. This is the first movie I've seen in theaters for the past 15 months, and it was a Netflix movie. Yeah, I'm talking about Army of the Dead. This just goes to show you how weird of a time we're living in as film fans, when the first movie this diehard film guy went to go see was a Netflix movie in theaters. The second only to Christmas Chronicles, by the way. That is how important this movie is to the pantheon of Netflix's legacy. However, I want to talk about Zack Snyder himself and how strange it is to be him at this moment in time, because right now he's hot off the heels from the very successful Zack Snyder's Justice League. Not that Warner Media has told us anything about that on an official level, mind you, but he's back with his first original concept since 2011's Sucker Punch with Netflix's Army of the Dead. Now, when I first heard of this idea, I was very intrigued because my first experience with Zack Snyder came when I sat down to watch 2004's excellent, and I mean excelente, Dawn of the Dead on opening day. To many people in my generation, and what I mean by that are kids who grew up in the 80s and 90s, this was our definitive zombie movie. Yeah, I know that's kind of sacrilege to say, because of George Romero, but the Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead was not our generation. That was definitely before us. And even Romero gave his seal of approval on Zack's remake. So yeah, I'm going to sit there and say that I think this is the definitive zombie movie of at least the past 25 years. Now, granted, I was younger, 22 at the time, and didn't know any better. All right, I hadn't gone to film school yet, but still, Dawn of the Dead was an amazing movie, and it does hold up 17 years later. And it appears that Zack himself has always wanted to go back to this world, but things sometimes take a bit longer than you'd like to get going there. After 10 years spent developing and molding the DCEU for Warner Brothers, he left that toxic hellscape for a zombie apocalypse set in the City of Sin. That's right, folks, Las Vegas. Going all the way back to March 2007, Zack Snyder's amazing 300 hit theaters. And it was during this decimation of the global box office that Variety ran a report on March 25th, 2007, saying that Zack's next project after he directed Watchmen would be Army of the Dead. Now, he was never slated to direct it himself, which is something that I kind of thought about as being odd at the time. I mean, why would the guy who made Dawn of the Dead return to the zombie genre and not want to direct it? I mean, right around that time, you had Land of the Dead, George Romero, 2005, and then you had Diary of the Dead by George Romero in 2008, never mind Survival of the Dead a couple years after that. I mean, it, kind of, you would think that Zack would want to go back, but no, not at the time. Not at the time. He just wanted to produce it. But Variety did drop the first nugget of info about this story and how it was originally pitched. And this is the original story that they told us. Set into quarantined Las Vegas in the not too distant future, Army revolves around a father who tries to save his daughter from imminent death in a zombie-infested world. Now, this is very, but not so much different than the plot of 2021's Army of the Dead, which is about a $200 million heist in the heart of Las Vegas during a zombie outbreak. But at the time, the script was actually being written by a guy named Joby Harold, whose main writing credit back then was Awake for the Weinstein Company, a film he also directed, and it was pretty critically panned at the time for a pretty terrible plot. However, since then, he did go on to write John Wick Chapter 2, and he's currently writing the Obi-Wan series for Lucasfilm, so apparently he got better, and that's great. And even though this film was announced back in 2007, we didn't really get any word on it again until June 2008, when it was reported that Matthias van Heijingen, a Dutch filmmaker, by the way, and I can never pronounce Dutch names, was going to be directing this movie. Now, he was mainly known at the time for just doing commercials for like Toyota, Bud Light, and Pepsi, but he was also a very good visual director who caught Zack Snyder's eye, and this was going to be his feature film directorial debut. But sadly, the project was canceled. Now, according to Deborah Snyder in a recent interview with The Hollywood Reporter, she explained that it was Warner Brothers, surprisingly, not surprisingly, that didn't want to put up the money for Army of the Dead. She says, Zack came up with the idea right after dawn. The script was originally written by Joby Harold. It was a great script, but it was developed with the eye that another director was going to be doing it. At the time, a lot of these movies were made for a lower budget. Or you had a movie like World War Z, which had so much spectacle. The original script fell in between. Oddly enough, Warner Brothers said it was too much money, and they didn't want to spend it. Legendary said, we'll pay the extra money, and we said no. Which is interesting, producers saying, yeah, maybe this isn't the right time. We felt the movie was not a lower budget movie, and it didn't have the spectacle to compete with something like World War Z. So we just put a pin in it, always thinking we'd come back to it. That's fascinating. That Warner's didn't want to spend the money. Legendary, who had the partnership deal with them at the time, was like, we'll put up the rest of the cash. But apparently it wasn't enough to make the film the way that they wanted to. So they passed. And that's kind of rare for Hollywood, to get a yes, but then to turn it down because it's still not enough money. But what brought them back to the concept of Army of the Dead was figuring out what to do after Justice League. The idea to return to Army of the Dead spoke to them, but Zack wanted to take another crack at it from the perspective of directing it. When they were developing it back in 2007 with Joby Harold, it was always for someone else to direct. So they brought in John Wick 3 screenwriter Shay Hatten to rework the script into something with a large-scale story, but still intimate enough so that Zack could really get in there. So what about Netflix? When did they enter the fray? Well, it was actually reported by Boris Kitt at The Hollywood Reporter in January 2019 that Netflix had acquired the rights from Warner Brothers and that Zack would be directing and producing Army of the Dead under his new banner, The Stone Quarry. This would be the first project under the newly minted company, which was previously called Cruel and Unusual Films. If I'm being honest here, I kind of feel like Cruel and Unusual was old Zack Snyder. Not that he has a mean bone in his body, really, but that is his old mentality. It's his old life. Stone Quarry kind of feels like this is him after coming out of the funk of the last couple years, and it's something that I fully support. Now, the story, as THR puts it, is that Netflix actually sought out Army of the Dead specifically, and the rumor was always that when they were negotiating with Warner Brothers for the rights of Army of the Dead, they had also inquired about Justice League. This rumor to many fans signals the time when Warner Brothers really started to think about just how popular the mythical unicorn that was Zack's 4-hour cut of Justice League really was, and one of the key factors as to why, a year ago, they greenlit the movie. Now, with the deal signed at Netflix, the shooting was set to begin in the summer of 2019 with an estimated budget of around $90 million. Zack was notably excited because he was quoted as saying here, "There are no handcuffs on me at all with this one." And as a longtime Zack Snyder fan, as a film student, as a filmmaker, as a person who loves the industry, that to me is like the quote I was waiting to hear. Because I know when it comes to Zack Snyder that he is an exceptionally gifted filmmaker, a very, very awesome visual filmmaker. But one of the big problems has always been constrainment from the studios, at least in the final edit. That's why we always get those damn, extended editions and director's cuts. But this time, none of it. 100% pure, uncut, grade A Zack Snyder. Me? Oh, I was in it. I was so in this one and just waiting to see more. Now from there, Dave Bautista was cast as Scott Ward back in April 2019, and Zack and Dave had actually been circling another project for about 3 years before Zack sent him a copy of the Army of the Dead script, and at first, Bautista said no, he actually passed on it. In fact, this is a direct quote. He says, "I said I wasn't interested. I had this chip on my shoulder and was looking for more juicy, dramatic roles. Then I read the script and it was a lot deeper and had more layers than I thought. And also, to be quite frank, I wanted to work with Zack. Now, not only did Dave flick that chip off his shoulder, but he even went to his longtime buddy James Gunn and backed out of taking a role in the Suicide Squad, which you would be thinking James Gunn might be a little bit ticked off. He wasn't mad at all. He actually only gave support to Bautista, saying, "Dave Bautista takes the craft seriously. He's grounded in real emotion and not showy. The difference between Dave and many wrestlers/actors is that when you look in his eyes on set, he's in the place he's supposed to be, not thinking about what he's going to do next." Which is true, and that's been something that's been said quite a bit about Dave Bautista. Watch the opening of Blade Runner 2049 if you want to see that man really act. And it's funny because even though James said this nice thing about his friend, Bautista commented back on that as well in pure Dave Bautista bravado, and he says, "I had the Suicide Squad where I got to work with my boy again, even though it's a smaller role. And then I had Army of the Dead, on which I get to work with Zack. I get to build a relationship with Netflix. I get a lead role in a great film, and I get paid a lot more money. I had to call James and I told him it breaks my heart because as a friend, I want to be there for you. But professionally, this is a smart decision for me." And again, that makes all the sense in the world, especially after Bautista was like getting ready to go toe to toe with Disney over the James Gunn firing situation from 2018. And I'm sure Gunn was nothing but supportive. And again, we're all better off as a result of this. But from there, they did cast Ella Purnell, Ana de la Reguera, Theo Rossi, and Huma Qureshi back in May of 2019. And then in July, Garret Dillahunt, Raúl Castillo, Omari Hardwick, Chris D'Elia, Hiroyuki Sanada, Nora Arnezeder, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Matthias Schweighöfer, there we go, Samantha Wynn, and Rich Citrone joined the cast for the film. And then filming officially began in July 2019 in Los Angeles and Albuquerque, New Mexico. But this wasn't like a huge superhero film for a massive movie studio, and because of that, Zack really did want to keep the production intimate. He kept the crew on set very, very small. It was an as-needed basis. And to facilitate this further, he kept the director's chairs off the set as well. His philosophy was basically that if you needed to sit, you didn't need to be there. And the reason was that on big tentpole movies, there are just so many people around that it becomes as much of a production behind the scenes as it does in front of the camera. And there's a lot of people waiting around not doing anything, by the way. That's a big part of it. You do your little job, you wait. Too many people sometimes, and Zack didn't want that. He wanted something intimate because where he wanted to be and where he ultimately was in the trenches with the actors and the crew, because not only was he the writer, producer, director, but the cinematographer as well. This was also Zack's first film shot in digital, and for it he used a custom-made red camera with a Canon Dream Lens. Now, the Dream Lens is something that I was most interested in seeing in action in this film because of how it allowed for a very shallow depth of field and a soft focus. It gives you a very distinct dreamy look. When Zack said that he wanted to be intimate with this production, he wasn't kidding. Almost every shot in the movie was a close-up, and that might be a bit daunting for some of the viewers out there, but like I said, there were no chains, there were no strings on Zack Snyder, and that was exactly what I wanted to see, for better or for worse. Now, for the interior of the casinos, they couldn't just roll into Vegas and start just blowing stuff up, hell no. So they actually decided to go all the way to the other side of the country, to Atlantic City in New Jersey, where there are quite a number of closed and vacant casinos. There, they had pretty much the run of the place. They could do what they want and really, really make it interesting. And they did. That action scene in the casino was pretty nuts. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't seen it, what are you doing here? Go watch it. So with that, the film got wrapped up. Everything was shot. Everything seemed like it was going pretty well. Post-production was moving along pretty smoothly, and until August 2020, when comedian Chris D'Elia, who was the helicopter pilot for the movie, was accused of sexual misconduct by multiple women. This caused an issue for Zack, as you know it probably would, and he knew he had to quickly recast, which is an issue during a global pandemic. So they decided to go with Tig Notaro. Now, as a quick side note here, there are people out there who will argue that allegations don't mean anything and that maybe they shouldn't have done anything. Well, looking further into the accusations against Delia, they ain't good. Just recently, he was sued for allegedly soliciting over 100 nude images from a 17-year-old girl he met online. The negative press alone surrounding it, if they would have kept him in, would have been devastating for the movie. And as Tig Notaro said in an interview about replacing Chris D'Elia, she said that there are consequences to these kind of situations. Delia has denied all claims. It's going to play itself out in court, but that is the reality. The cold reality of it is just perception is everything, and the perception here is terrible. So that's basically why they had to do it. But getting Tig Notaro as a result of all this, I think really benefited the movie because they spent 2 weeks with her against a green screen and were able to digitally insert her character into the movie almost flawlessly at times. When I first heard of this, I actually thought that, Delia was just going to be a small character, right? A very small character. He's the pilot. He might pop in at the beginning, pop in at the end, and that's that. I was actually really wrong. The helicopter pilot was actually a pretty decent chunk of screen time in the movie, and they had to go in and spend a couple weeks really getting this stuff right in order to be able to integrate it properly. And they did shoot one scene on a new set with Ana de la Reguera, and then other than that, Tig was all on her own on a green screen. And I mean, to Zack's credit, this is when him being as visual of a filmmaker as he is comes into play and serves as a very, very solid asset to get this thing done. Now, also speaking to Zack's credit, Netflix really wanted to invest in him. I think that's pretty apparent at this point. Right now, in May 2021, Zack Snyder is probably the most talked about director in the world, as I already said. From the Snyder Cut to Army of the Dead, he has been on the tips of many people's tongues for a long time, and I'm sure that Netflix has absolutely paid attention to this. They want to make Army of the Dead their next big franchise, and they're doing this by expanding the universe with not one, but two prequels. One is a rom-com heist movie called Army of Thieves, which centers around Matthias Schweighöfer's character, Ludwig Dieter, who also directed the film. They started filming this one in October 2020, and it wrapped production in December 2020. Keep in mind that this is before anyone out there had seen a trailer for the movie. This is before anyone out there had really known much about what the movie was, and Netflix believed in it enough in order to greenlight and shoot a prequel. Now, Zack has said that he doesn't know when this movie is coming. I've heard that it's coming towards the end of 2021, which just makes the most amount of sense. But still, that's very fascinating that they're going to shoot this thing in another country, and it has to do with a zombie outbreak that is localized to Las Vegas. We're going to have to wait and see what happens with it, but it should be fascinating. Now, there's also going to be Army of the Dead Las Vegas, which will center around some of the characters from Army of the Dead during their early phases of the zombie outbreak. And if you've seen the movie, the opening credits, you get a bit of a look at that and how crazy that was back then. This one, however, is being helmed by Jay Oliva, and it features the voice talents of most of the main cast of the movie, as well as some of Zack's friends from other productions. This is an anime-inspired series from the same production company that's done quite a bit of video game trailers. And so looking at their demo, I'm very interested to see what happens with this. It should be very fascinating to see what goes on. Netflix obviously wants to delve into the anime side of things, and given how violent and big this movie is, making it animated for the early days of the outbreak does seem to make the most amount of sense. But here's the coolest thing, and this ties into what I said at the beginning of this. To celebrate the release of Army of the Dead, Netflix worked a deal with Cinemark and released the film a week early in 600 theaters nationwide. Thankfully, it was playing in the theater just a few miles from my place, so I was able to finally go back and see the movie now that I'm vaccinated. And the cool thing here, too, is a lot of other people did it as well, because the movie, according to box office reports, pulled in $300,000 roughly in its opening day. That ain't bad for the pandemic and for a movie that's going to be on a streaming service next week. So, you gotta love it where you gotta love it. Speaking of the film critically, it's actually doing pretty well on Rotten Tomatoes. And normally Zack Snyder movies get kind of, panned. But the Snyder Cut and this one are doing pretty good. Right now, it's sitting at a 76% fresh score, with the critical consensus being an ambitious, over-the-top zombie heist mashup. Army of the Dead brings Zack Snyder back to his genre roots with a suitably gory splash. And that's very true. I enjoyed the movie immensely. I had my issues with it, as I do with every single movie I watch. Nothing is ever perfect. But it was good to see Zack back in his element. It was good to see Zack doing something that wasn't tethered by Warner Brothers and what it became. As a longtime Zack Snyder fan, this movie makes me happy. It's one I'm looking forward to watching again when it hits Netflix, and I'm very much looking forward to having discussions with you guys about it, because there's stuff in this movie that I seriously want to talk about. So as always, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your opinions on this one. I would love to hear what you think I should cover next, if there's another movie you want me to dive into the production history of. And be sure to keep an eye out on 3 Buck Theater for the post discussion when this movie does launch officially. If you're catching this after the fact, go and find that discussion. It's going to be a lot of fun. And as always, I'll talk to you all later. Have yourself a great day. Thank you again for listening. My name is Matt Jarbo. This has been Podio Commentary. Have a great day, and peace out.